to anyone thinking about mass timber, no matter the size of your company, is at least give it a chance. We've kind of come up with a top 10 list, if you will, of things that we share with anybody and everybody who asks us, how do you make it pencil, especially at smaller scale, especially for affordable housing. There's some really easy, low-hanging fruit ones. It's helping us get into more of that design to really get a honed concept that can transition from one affordable housing project to the next. Helped us unlock affordable mass timber housing.
This is the Mass Timber Group show. Today I caught up with Molly and Scott Cutler of Cutler Development. They're developers in the Des Moines area working with mass timber affordable housing. We unpack their top lessons learned and how they're able to get mass timber to pencil for residents earning between 30 and 80% of area median income. Scott and Molly shared a lot of their lessons learned and the best practices they're taking into future projects. But before we jump in, if you want to learn more about building multifamily mass timber buildings and meet other teams doing the same thing, we're hosting the second annual Mass Timber Group Summit this August in Denver. We've got 30 plus sessions, 3 amazing networking parties, and building tours of the coolest projects in Denver. Check out the link in the show notes below for more info. And if you like these podcasts, subscribing to the channel is the biggest compliment you can give us. It helps us book incredible guests like Scott and Molly, and it brings more mass timber awareness to the rest of the world. So with that, let's get into it.
Yeah, thanks for having us today. My name's Scott, and this is Molly. We're both with Cutler Development. Cutler Development is Molly and myself, and we joke our dog Arthur, who's barely on the screen here, and we work out of our house. We're a small-scale urban infill developer. I started the business, it's been 8 years ago now, and Molly's been part-time. She started part-time like 4 years ago and has been full-time now for over 2 years.
Yeah, our mission at Cutler Development is to develop projects that better neighborhoods, society, and the environment. So our focus on the neighborhood piece of that is we really focus on urban infill, and we tend to build in cities that have walkable kind of neighborhood pockets. Our goal is to enable residents to live, work, and play in the same area. On the piece of our mission statement that talks about bettering society, we focus a lot on affordable and workforce housing. About 95% of the units we've done to date have tenants living in them who are making between 30% and 80% of the area median income. So that's something that's really important to us. And going back to that neighborhood piece, locating those types of units in livable, walkable cities. We love sharing stories about tenants who are living in one building of ours and then working just 2 blocks down in a retail shop that we may have done a historic conversion on. And so they're able to we joke, a lot of our tenants, instead of having cars, they have e-bikes because the radius that they're trying to travel is very accessible by that mode of transportation. And then the third and final piece of our mission statement is to build projects that better the environment. And that's really where our mass timber journey has come into play. And Scott can tell you, I have a great story of how we sort of unknowingly backed into mass timber on a project a couple of years ago. And we really haven't turned back. We believe in it. Absolutely. We actually exclusively now do historic renovations or new construction in mass timber only. Again, that idea of trying to protect the environment and do our part in development to reduce kind of the carbon emissions that come from real estate and construction.
Yeah, that's a great origin story. And I love how you guys have those 3 different pillars in your mission statement. And I can definitely see how locating your buildings inside a walkable area, as well as folding in that income targeted resident base, they all kind of come together, right? And that environmental factor, some people think it's just the materials that go into a building. It's mass timber, so it's environmentally friendly. But actually, like if you put residences in that livable, workable area, like you said, like It reduces the need for transportation. It reduces the load on the infrastructure. You're not sprawling out, right? You're building where services are already located, and so there's much less effort and maintenance and ongoing um, operational carbon, if you will, but outside of the building. But also, if you're in a tight neighborhood with services all around you, you don't have to drive 3 miles down the road to your grocery store and then come back, right? You can use those e-bikes, you can walk. I would be super interested to hear how you guys, quote unquote, backed into mass timber.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, you got it. Like you mentioned, there's so many benefits to infill projects, and Molly and I have been really involved in one neighborhood, actually pretty close to our house, the Valley Junction neighborhood. It's located in the city of West Des Moines, so it's actually just outside of Des Moines proper. We've done like 7 or 8 projects there now, and um, we completed construction on our first mass timber project. It would have been this past, well, now like a year and a month ago, December.
21.
So December of
22.
22. And the project, the project concept is a mixed use building with about 4,000 square feet of commercial on the first floor, 11 apartments ranging from 30 to 80% AMI on floors 2 and 3, and then 2 small offices. And we had the project, really the capital stack was compiled, the building was designed. We were really close to being ready to break ground and move forward when our architect went to an AIA conference and heard a speaker from Woodworks, which has actually been really kind of a fun full circle thing because Woodworks has been a huge help to us on our projects in so many ways. And but so our architect heard this presentation, came back and design meeting just off the cuff mentioned that he'd heard this presentation and how cool this mass timber concept seemed to be, and that it had an environmental benefit and also a really unique kind of warm aesthetic. And we looked into it, and we agreed that it was really cool. And so I think much to our and I'd say this jokingly, they're a fantastic group and they're very happy to do so. But we ended up actually then going back and retroactively redesigning the building to be a mass timber building, um, which um, which was a fantastic experience, but also came with, a set of challenges as well.
Yeah, that's one of the things that everybody in the AEC space that's working with mass timber harps on is like, if you want to work with mass timber, you got to design it from the beginning to be for mass timber, right? Like especially if cost is the determining factor, like you get to the end of the design bid build phase, like, and you just try to throw mass timber in there, it's not going to work. It's not optimized to take advantage of those efficiencies. Outside of like the warm aesthetic and the cool factor, uh, were any of the aspects of mass timber, where it's like install speed, anything like that, were those factors in your decision to move forward? Hey, we're going to get back to the podcast in just a second. But first, I have a question for you. Are you somebody looking to build a mass timber project? If the answer is yes, then you need to put together an experienced team.
Our partners at Cornerstone Timber Frames are leaders in heavy timber construction and have 30 plus years of experience, which means you can trust them to get the job done right.
They collaborate with Nordic Structures to bring you the highest quality FSC certified mass timber available. They also have some of the most advanced fabrication technology in the industry, so your project goes up smoothly without costly on-site modification or delays.
That means they have the experience, network, and technology to make your next mass timber project a success. Learn more about Cornerstone Timber Frames by clicking the link in the show notes below.
Definitely. Yeah. I think you're right. I mean, it certainly is easier to know you're doing mass timber before you start to design a building. It's also one thing we've learned on the second project, and we'll get into this later, but what we learned on our second mass timber project is it's easier to know exactly who your mass timber supplier will be before
Mhm.
you get too far into design. So we could talk about those details. But yeah, I think, we that first project, having designed it in more traditional method and then going back and redesign for mass timber, it did afford us a lot of introspection and figuring out, how do we make this the cost the first cost in mass timber invariably came back higher. And so we went through several value engineering exercises that ended up, while they maybe slowed down the design phase on that first project, it uncovered a lot of things that we could then take to the second project, and we're still
Hmm.
taking to the third and beyond in our pipeline. We've kind of come up with a like a top 10 list, if you will, of things that we share with anybody and everybody who asks us, how do you make it pencil, especially at smaller scale, especially for affordable housing? Um, and we've tried to share that list with anybody whoever asks. I don't know, Scott, do you want to talk about some of the ones on the list or?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, some of the highlights. We have it pulled up here. Trying to remember from so these are slides from um a presentation, and actually multiple presentations we've given. So yeah, some of the highlights, I think one of the big ones I mentioned previously is utilizing different just resources and leveraging relationships. Basically, we found that there really is a community that believes in mass timber, and that we found to be, and this may sound a little bit naive, but I think we really believe it. It's just a lot of the people that are involved, at least especially at this stage, are very open to sharing information, and just want to do whatever they can to help, um, you know, like raise the tide to lift all boats. I
Mhm.
suppose, using that saying. So I think that would be one of our top 10 is utilizing mass timber resources. For us, a really big one was Woodworks. They were a fantastic resource for us.
Yeah, they helped us anywhere from, uh, on the first mass timber building, we had no connections to any suppliers. So getting us kind of connected to a couple to bid things out, all the way to we bumped into a couple of issues or concerns from our insurance provider around
Hmm.
building in mass timber. And so getting them on phone calls and emails to help provide the information, since we hadn't done one before, we couldn't provide that information ourselves, but they were able to step in and help get that insurance agent to kind of understand that, okay, this is not just building a giant matchbox, and that there are precautions and oversizing beams and that sort of thing for fire. Um, yeah.
Yeah. So, and or go ahead, if Brady, if you want to jump in.
So I was going to ask you some of those value engineering things that you guys did for the building. Were there any lessons learned from that experience that ended up on your top 10?
Absolutely.
Very much so.
Yeah, there's some really easy, like low hanging fruit ones. One for us was the decking. It can be a different size thickness between floors versus on the roof. And so, we had about 4-inch decking on our first project, the junction lofts. We had 4-inch decking between each of the floors, and we had originally had 4-inch decking for the roof. But after another round of value engineering, we found we could reduce the roof decking to 3 inches. So taking out, 25% volume wise meant, in our experience, the pricing for mass timber directly correlates to volume pretty much. And so we were able to take 25% out of at least that level's cost for the decking. So quick things like that, all the way to more detailed. Scott, you figured out the kind of how to use demising walls. If you want to tell that story.
You're nice. Yeah. Yeah. So I think one of the big learnings from our first project that we took to our second project, and is really integral to our concept and making it financially feasible, is utilizing a hybrid mass timber and dimension lumber design. With our projects, our buildings so far have been mixed use with commercial on the first floor. So we have mass timber columns, beams, and decking as the structure for the first floor. Then, as we go up into the apartment levels, we essentially value engineer out the columns, leaving the beams, and then we do utilize mass timber decking as well. We used MPP from Freres on the first project, and CLT from Sterling on the second project. But in that design, we eliminated the columns on the second and third floors and located partition walls such that we took advantage of optimized spans of the decking material,
Mhm.
so that we essentially have those walls providing the bearing capacity that the columns would have provided, and so we can eliminate the columns.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that I hear a lot is when people say, I'm going to build a mass timber building, they think, oh, my decking systems, my walls, everything is mass timber. When sometimes, especially on quote unquote smaller scale projects, that gets really cost prohibitive because there's just so much fiber. When in reality, like you don't need that for structural purposes. Like you can use light frame hybrid systems to get the most out of both, right? Uh, when you guys were doing the junction lofts previously, and then you started with the star lofts, did you guys use the same principles between the two?
We did. It's been great. We've been able to take some of these learnings from project to project. So we took the in junction lofts, we designed studio and one bedrooms using kind of the hybrid method that Scott had described. And we were able to pretty much keep the same square footage, same layout, everything for the studios and one bedrooms in Star. And then we went ahead and added a two-bedroom unit type. So now we've got designs for Studio One and ones and twos that we can take to any project moving forward.
And you mentioned that these are affordable housing builds. Are they build for rent or are they build to sell?
They're all for rent. And so that's another thing that we love about mass timber is the durability of mass timber. When you're in the rental market, in particular in the affordable and the workforce rental market, you know, these rental units, based on the funding stack and kind of some of the subsidy that you have to have on affordable housing projects to make them pencil, a lot of those restrictions on rental incomes, those last for 15 to 20 years. So you're committing up front that you will rent at those levels for 15 to 20 years, depending on the source. And so it's really important to us that the unit looks just as nice and has just as nice an aesthetic quality for the first tenant who moves in year one as for the tenant who moves in year 19. And so that was something that really has brought us back time and time again to mass timber is that durable finish, the beauty that it brings to a space without additional drywall or carpeting or paints and lacquers. So it keeps maintenance really pretty low for us for those decades. But it also keeps the quality of the materials of the unit high for the tenants.
Did you, when you guys were going through your pro forma, how much of the spread, and you don't have to like give exact numbers, but if you're using mass timber and you have, more exposed surfaces, which means less drywall, less paint, things like that, uh, would you say that the absence of those materials helped influence the balancing of costs for the premium in fiber that mass timber usually brings?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. We unfortunately we're a small enough outfit, and part of the way that we make our projects work is by staying extremely low overhead. We don't have like extremely detailed or quantified sort of analysis of sort of those savings from the reduction in finishes, and then and sort of how that um, skews the balance, I suppose, of the structural design and those costs. But I that's definitely the concept. There's savings. So as Molly mentioned, there's no drywall in the ceiling, so we can leave the mass timber exposed. That also just creates, in addition to having the mass timber exposed, we have sprinkler lines that are exposed. We have all of our electrical running through conduit, so it's easy to access and easy to maintain. We also expose concrete on our projects, and so that's another benefit. As you know, I'm sure most people listening to this podcast know, mass timber has the structural rigidity to allow for elevated, true concrete, elevated decks, and so we like to leave that exposed, and we just put a simple sealer over the top, and that's also just a very durable and low cost finish.
Yeah, it's like kind of like the combination of all those factors, right? That make it feasible. Uh, there's people listening that work for $100 million development companies, And then there's people that might do a couple projects a year with a small team. You guys have done it, right? So you don't have to be in this camp to work with mass timber. Like you can absolutely build, 3-story, 15, 20 unit affordable housing type projects with mass timber. It's doable. Would you guys say that it was exponentially more challenging than building with what you guys have already done? Or would you say it was like how would you stack that up?
It's a great question.
You can
We
start if you want.
sure it's a great question, and I think the first thing we would say to anyone thinking about mass timber, no matter the size of your company, is at least give it a chance. If you know the two of us working out of our house, like you said, the two of us working out of our house can figure out a way to make it pencil. There are ways, and I think the biggest thing for us was asking or working with our general contractor and all of his subs, um, and getting our hands on materials. The on the Junction Lofts project, we always tell the story. Everybody was recommending that we bring in a specialized framing company that specialized in mass timber specifically from out of town, and that just wasn't going to work on the financial side of it for the project. And so Scott, we had already decided on Frere's mass supply panel at that time, and so Scott called. I think he called Tyler or Austin or out there in Oregon, and said, "Hey, can you send me a sample of this stuff? I want to show it to the local framing crews." And actually, that's the sample in the back of our on our desk back there. We have a Frere's and also a Sterling sample from the two projects we've done. And Scott took it around to the different framing crews, and they said, "Oh, we got this, no problem. We'll be able to figure this out." And so that saved a ton of money. It also helped to grow the ecosystem here in Des Moines. We were
Mhm.
able to use that same framing company on our second mass timber building, and then they're going out and getting other jobs. And we hope that they get more mass timber jobs because they've had experience in it, and it just grows the number of people that can work with this material in the area.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to drill down on that topic a little bit more. So a lot of times when people are when they're new to the mass timber space and they're working on their first project, the things that often come up a lot in the cost realm are my subs or my GC is unfamiliar with the project. And so they build in like an uncertain risk factor into that bid, right? Which then makes the project not financially feasible. How did you guys work with the GC and the sub to kind of mitigate those concerns? Was it as simple as like, here's a sample, but and they're just going to be this big, or did you do any sort of like extra training? Did you connect them with the resources, those conversations, that community that you talked about?
Yeah, I think it definitely requires a construction team, well, really an entire project team, not just construction, also the design team and even some of the financing team, to be willing, excuse me, to um, try something that's and now I wouldn't even say new, but at least something that is new to some markets, maybe or less common. And we have a great contractor that we work with. It actually it's my brother's company, and he's done a large number of projects with us. And but I think sort of, and Molly mentioned something similar, but to build upon that concept, the the projects that we've done, the first project that we did, no one on our project team had any experience with mass timber. And on the second project, only some of the project team had experience. I think some of our learnings and maybe recommendations would be um, with the structural engineering firm. Um, they're really, I would say, most structural engineers have the capacity to design in mass timber, whether they have experience or not. We had great experience with the firm. I think it's okay if we give a shout out to a firm who did a great job, KPFF. And while the local group may or may not action it, and don't quote me on this. Well, I guess by nature you can quote me on this because we're recording. But I know locally they don't have a lot of mass timber experience just because there isn't a big mass timber market locally. But I think they were able to draw from the firm's mass timber experiences,
Hmm.
um, largely in the Pacific Northwest and some of their other locations. I'm trying to think.
Great
I'm gonna jump
connection back
in.
to that community,
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
those offices we're able to exchange information from Portland to Des Moines and say, okay, yeah, your design looks good, or here's what we've experienced. And so that ended up leading to a structural design where, to your point, Brady, a lot of times these, subs or sub designers will introduce a big conservative factor into their bids. In some of the trades that may look like just a higher cost for labor or something along those lines. In the structural world, that may look like, extremely oversized columns and beams that then make it infeasible to work. And so I think, and without speaking for them, but I think, KPFF was able to leverage kind of across teams that had done it on the West Coast to help here in Des Moines. We ended up with columns that were appropriately sized and kind of didn't run into needing to value engineer the mass timber. We could focus on other areas in the project.
Yeah, for sure. How did that work with your insurance uh, firm? Was it as simple as like a couple communications back and forth with Woodworks? Did the premium come down to a level that was more in line with traditional stick frame or concrete and steel? Like, how did that insurance aspect play out? That's a big, scary, unknown topic in this world.
Yeah, great question. The builder's risk policy on both projects came out just fine. It was consistent with other construction types. The ongoing liability policy, we did have we did have some challenges with the junction loss project, but ultimately we were able to get the policy price back down to a very reasonable level. And with that, and you mentioned this, you're spot on. Woodworks was a huge help. We reached out to Woodworks and we actually brought them into a call and some email exchanges, and they were able to provide the data needed to prove to the insurance underwriter that mass timber isn't, any more risk. Well, I'm trying to think of how to word that correctly, but basically that mass timber is insurable.
Got
It
it.
also came into our conversations with the city in the kind of the planning and design departments when there were questions about, especially on that first project, when there were questions about fire safety and ratings and that sort of thing. Woodworks, that's another example of kind of them hopping on a call and with our team and the city of West Des Moines. And I think we pulled them in. The second project we did was in Des Moines, even though they're about 2 miles apart. So we were in two different jurisdictions, and so similarly, they were very willing to jump on a call and kind of get through those conversations.
Was your guys' first project the first time that West Des Moines had seen mass timber come through their building department?
It was.
It was, yeah. That building, the Junction Lofts, is the first in West Des Moines, the second in the kind of greater Des Moines area, and the first in the state to feature residential units. So it was
Got
a
it.
lot
And
of
then
new for, like Scott mentioned earlier, a lot of new for our team, for the city, for funders of the affordable housing components, for the
mhm.
insurance. There's a lot of first, which was fun. We learned a lot that we were able to take to the next projects.
Those things that you're taking to the next project, is there anything in that top 10 list or lessons learned in the code in the building department space that you preemptively will take to the city next time?
Anything in the code specifically?
I think one of the things that we've found that hopefully should be encouragement for others looking to do mass timber projects is that we've been able to work within the code, not ask for any variances, and find a code path forward on both projects in two different cities.
Great. So yeah, you don't have to take an alternative means and methods approach to this. It's baked right in already.
I'd say on both projects, and feel free to jump in. There was maybe a couple friction points, or it was a little bit more challenging than a non-mass timber project. But typically, as Molly mentioned, we were able to bring in woodworks or bring. It was just really an education
Mhm.
piece that it was able to kind of resolve any potential code challenges.
Yeah. I'm going to change topics a little bit. And I can't remember if you said this before we started recording or right after, but you talked about the importance of going and finding the manufacturer that you're going to be working with and then working from them from the start. What were the lessons learned that kind of led you to that? And then how are you guys going to take that philosophy moving forward?
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's sort of always um, a tricky thing. It's a kind of a chicken and the egg. You want to have enough design that you can go out to mass timber suppliers to get pricing. But when you have that much design, you have to have chosen in your head at least a supplier because every supplier's dimensions of their paneling, for instance, is different. And so you may find that one of the suppliers comes back too high and you need to switch. Well, now you have to go back and switch your design because your spans are suddenly changing. And so it's a really neat time to be a part of the industry because it's so new and at least in the US, it's so new and there's so many companies starting up, but they all have their own kind of proprietary in some cases or patented in some cases kind of dimensions and so it's a delicate balance of getting someone in early enough that you think their pricing will kind of line out and so you go down the path of designing your building to match their specs and having it requires kind of a large level of trust with that manufacturer
Mhm.
or supplier so that was just we didn't realize that, I guess, in between the 2 projects, between Junction Lofts and between Star Lofts, and so that was a really big learning for us and something that, we ended up having to go through some redesign efforts on the Star Lofts project, and so that's sort of a learning that we're definitely taking into to future projects.
Got it. And we talked to Michaela Harms with Sterling,
Yeah.
gosh, a couple weeks ago. Actually, I think her podcast episode comes out tomorrow, which
Okay,
would be
cool.
Thursday or yeah, January or February 1st. I'm trying to do math when we're recording this a day early.
Sterling has just been fantastic to work with.
Yeah,
Michaela and Archie and
yeah. Candace.
Candace. Yeah, they just have a great team. And but we do have subsidy on that project to help um, the project both offer a really high level design and also affordable housing.
Got it. And when you say subsidy, can you define that for people not inside the development world?
Yeah, sure. It just various grants or tax credits, or just any sort of typically public, sometimes private funding that um, often we have to apply for as part of some competitive and scored process, but then is granted to the project because without that subsidy, um, affordable housing projects
Yep.
often just aren't they don't pencil.
And those grants and forgivable loans, or in some cases, zero interest loans that get paid back or whatever the form it takes, um, in exchange, the project offers a certain number of units that are at certain income designations for a certain amount of time.
Got it. Were any of those grants or subsidies did you receive specifically because you use mass timber?
The only one was the one the United States Forest Service Wood Innovations Grant. So both the Junction Lofts and the Star Lofts were recipients of that grant funding. That's been a great program for us. It's helped on the first project, that was really what we used to help offset some of the costs as we were just figuring all of this out, the cost of mass timber. On this current project, it's helping us to kind of iterate and get more technical on the mass timber, technical on the sound assembly, which we changed from one project to the next. Technical on the beam sizing. It's helping us get into more of that design to really get a honed concept that can be um, transition from one affordable housing project to the next. So we're extremely thankful to the U.S. Forest Service for that grant funding on both of those projects. It's really helped us unlock affordable mass timber housing here in Des Moines, at least.
Yeah, it's a great program, and we'll link it down in the show notes below so that if any other aspiring mass timber developers want to look into that, it'll be there for them. Where in the build process is Star Lofts right now?
Yeah, we're about 50% of the way through. We they put the roof on actually this week. So we're all dried in now, and we've had quite a bit of snow and cold temperatures here in Des Moines. So we will actually need some time to dry out the building from some of the snow melt before we start on the sound, kind of the flooring of each level. But after that, we've got MEP kind of trades coming in for rough-ins, and we're aiming for certificate of occupancy around Thanksgiving or so, with the first tenants
Okay.
moving in at the end of the year.
Got it. And then how many units and what was the size of that one?
The building's approximately 22,000, I think, square feet, and there's 20 units ranging from 30 to 80% AMI.
Got it. Got it. So people will be able to move in close to December, we'll call it. Do you guys have any plans after Star Loss? Do you guys have anything in the pipeline?
We do, yeah. One of the things So we've learned through these 2 projects that mass timber we absolutely love, and, for all the sustainability reasons, for the aesthetic reasons, for the, mental, physical, and emotional benefits that studies have shown being surrounded in natural materials like wood bring to, residential tenants. So we know that we wanna continue in our pipeline. Our future projects are already all, we've got the vision for mass timber. The second thing that we've introduced on the store lofts, that we didn't have on the junction lofts, but was spurred because of the junction lofts use of mass timber is, we're going on the Star Lofts project, we're going after the International Living Future Institute's zero carbon certification. So that's a net zero embodied carbon and operational carbon emissions for the building. In each category, embodied and operational, there's a required reduction versus a comparable building, and then a requirement to kind of offset the rest. And so we can go into more detail of kind of what we've done on the Star Loss, which has been really, really a neat and intense exercise actually to achieve the embodied carbon reduction, operational carbon reduction, and then to install on and offsite solar to reduce the remainder of the operational carbon. But that's something that we want to take. We've been able. It took a lot of work, and we're very thankful to the team, our architect, our general contractor, and other resources who got us there. On the Star Lofts building, and it's something we want to take to future projects. So those are kind of the 2 big things, and they're intertwined. Mass timber was the way that we got to net zero on the one of the big contributing factors to net zero on the embodied carbon side.
Yeah. When people are distinguishing between embodied and operational carbon, for those that aren't familiar with the difference between those two, can you unpack that real quick?
Yeah, definitely. So, I guess put simply, the embodied carbon footprint of a building is the carbon footprint of the construction process, and the operational carbon footprint would then be once the building is occupied, it's the ongoing carbon footprint to run the building, so to speak.
So it's more efficient, takes less, energy to heat and all that kind of stuff. Does that translate to reduced utility bills for tenants too?
It absolutely does. Uh, we've done a lot in high efficiency MEP systems, kind of low flow water fixture, plumbing fixtures, that sort of thing. That we've seen on the junction lofts. While we didn't measure those things in pursuit of the certification, we still did a lot of them. And since that one's already occupied, we're starting to get data. And those water and utility bills are much lower than some of the buildings in the surrounding area, kind of similar size footprint than those units are.
Yeah, I think that's another critical piece that I think a lot of people overlook when we're talking about affordable or attainable housing. Like it might be cheap on the rent or the purchase price, but what does it cost to actually live there for 20 years? Right. So if you can have your heating bill, like that adds up a lot over 20 years, right? And those are things that people have to pay for, right? I think that that's a really key thing that a lot of people have looked at operational carbon from the carbon standpoint, but I think it very much so translates to like this is how it impacts the tenant's pocketbooks every single month.
That's a great point. Absolutely. When you're, working in the 30 to 80% AMI, that's something that you want that to be a good experience for tenants and not be a hindrance to their own personal financial growth.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it sounds like you guys have big plans moving into the future. You've already got one project done, one's underway. I'm excited to see what you guys are after next. I'm excited to see how Starloft it's already topped out. Excited to see how it gets finished. We'll share some of the pictures that you guys have from both projects inside the episode and then on the thumbnails and stuff like that moving forward. I've got a couple questions that we ask every guest. Would you mind if I dove into those?
Sure.
Of course.
Sure.
All right. So you guys went through a big learning journey in mass timber. Outside of woodworks, because we know that they're like the go-to resource for information, was there a book, a podcast, a show, a conference, a seminar, anything like that that you think other aspiring mass timber developers absolutely need to connect with?
Got an idea?
You go for it. Yeah. Um, so you're right. We have talked about Woodworks. I would say go to their Woodworks Innovation Network. It's a map of all of the mass timber buildings that are either under construction or completed. It's self-reported, so there may be some that are missed. And find one that's close by. We've taken trips to several mass timber buildings, and we've cold called the developers. A great example, Jeff Spiritos with Spiritos Properties out in New Haven, Connecticut. I don't know if you've had a chance to interview him on the podcast. He would be a great ad. His daughter Erica is also in the mass timber space out on the West Coast. We were able to go to New Haven. We were in town for other business, and we called him up and we said, "Hi, we're from Iowa. Can we come by and tour both your Acme building and your 340 plus Dixwell Avenue building?" And they were both under construction. And he was incredibly generous with his time and walked us through. He had their architect join us at one of the buildings. They showed us, that's where we first saw a CLT elevator shaft. And we ended up taking that back and putting it into the Starlofts project. And so it goes back to what Scott was saying earlier in the call or earlier in this podcast of just the community that's out there. Of course, there are a lot of resources in terms of YouTube and conferences and that sort of thing, but don't be afraid to reach out to someone who's done it in your area would be my suggestion.
Yeah, ourselves included.
Yeah.
Anyone's
Yeah.
welcome. Come to Des Moines. We'd love to have you and tour. And I think that's great. I think what I would add would be if you're able to make I think to make what's the date of your conference, Brady?
Our conference is August 1st and 2nd.
Okay, perfect. Yep, that one or the International Mass Timber Conference, or I know there's several options, but a conference I think would be it's just a way to very quickly meet others, kind of plug into the ecosystem, be inspired. We were so inspired by the last conference we went to by other people doing other cool projects.
It's a great one.
Yeah, those are great answers. I think that in the end, it's the people that make things happen, right? So whether you get around them by cold calling somebody or getting around in a conference and kind of just shotgun approaching and meeting as many people as you can, like both are fantastic options. Have you guys met anybody in this journey that really inspired you?
Oh gosh, so many people. We've kind of named some of them. Earliest in our journey was Archie Landerman when he was working at Woodworks, and he's now with Sterling.
He was a huge help to us and just a really nice person. He, as Molly mentioned, he was helping us with the Junction Loss project while he worked at Woodworks, and then we ended up then we worked with him when he was at Sterling on our second Star Loss project.
Yeah, trying to think. We mentioned Jeff Spiritos, a developer on the East Coast who's working in mass timber. Tyler Freres at Freres, Michaela Harms at Sterling. There's just a great community. Those are the kind of initial ones that come to mind.
Yeah, all of those are absolutely wonderful people. We haven't connected with Jeff yet, but we are interviewing Erica. Tyler's going to be on the show. We've interviewed Michaela. We haven't talked to Archie yet, but we'll make sure that we put him on the list to reach out to. Before we ask the last question, where can people connect with you guys to get some of those resources, to find out more about what you guys do? Where can people learn about you?
Yeah, we're at cutlerdevelopment.com. Our emails are just scott@cutlerdevelopment.com or molly@cutlerdevelopment.com. And we have a presence on LinkedIn as well, both individually on personal pages as well as our company page, Cutler Development. There's two out there. We're the one in Des Moines.
All right, I'll make sure to link the right ones down below.
Okay.
And then last question, it's kind of a fun one. We ask it to everybody. If you could change anything about your industry, whether that be development or development in mass timber, what would you change and why?
It would be nice if we could spend monopoly money instead of real money. I mean, there's so many things we want to do. We've been really fortunate to be able to design a lot of those. And by things, I mean, environmental concepts and design concepts. We've been fortunate to be able to design a lot of those into our projects. But at the end of the day, we're beholden to the pro forma, and so that it does limit what we are able to do.
That's a great one.
Yeah, great
Um,
answers.
I would say if we could, how should I say this? I'd say if we could have more mass transit buildings in areas of mass transit, that's something that Scott and I are big believers in. We bike to as many meetings as we can when there's not 20 inches of snow outside. Although for Christmas, Scott got a fat tire bike, so maybe he'll be biking to some
No
of our meetings.
excuse now.
Yeah.
But incorporating that, trying to consolidate areas into neighborhoods that are dense, we think is really um, will go a long way to helping humans offset their kind of their carbon footprints, and just a lot more focus on that by cities. One of the things that we try to do with each of our urban infill projects is if there's a nearby mass transit, like a bus stop for the mass transit system here in Des Moines, we will offer as part of, we actually bake it into the pro forma. And this is where Scott said, if we could, we've got many ideas and we try to put as many as we can into the pro forma before the model breaks and says, you have no more money, you cannot do this anymore. But on the Star Lofts, for instance, we were able to get, we modeled in all access annual passes onto the Des Moines area regional transit bus system, because there's a bus stop
Wow.
right outside the building. And so that's something that we're like, it goes back to our mission at Cutler Development of developing projects that have that focus on neighborhoods. And so that's something we would love to see more of, is developers focusing in the urban areas versus the kind of suburban sprawl.
Yeah. Again, fantastic answers, and I couldn't agree more. There's so many things that we could do that we really wish we could do, but sometimes we got to pare those down to what makes sense financially, and maybe prioritize that list a little bit. But those are all great things to be considering, especially as a developer, and for any developers listening. This has been really fun, guys. I had a blast talking with you. Thank you guys for spending just short of an hour with me, and I hope to see you guys at either our conference or at the next International Mass Timber Conference next year.
Thanks so much for having us, Brady. We had a great time.
Yeah, thanks a bunch, Brady. It was a ton of fun.